Or I think of the end of the book of Habakkuk. You know if it's out of Habakkuk, it is of the Lord, right? This is how the book of Habakkuk ends. In Habakkuk chapter 3, verse 17, listen to what Habakkuk says. Though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. He will make my feet like deer's feet. He will make me walk on my high hills. It wasn't about the stuff. It wasn't about the blessings for Habakkuk or David or Job. It was about the blesser, not the blessing. It was about the giver, not the gift. It was about the hand that gives, not what was in the hand for them. And when a person follows God just for the stuff and just for the blessings, and those blessings are taken away, they become angry and they become bitter, and often they blame God. You took this from me. But when they follow God for who God is and because He is worthy of all glory, honor, and praise, and the blessings are taken away, they can still worship God. And they can say, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength. And this is the test for Abraham now. This is the test for Abraham. Abraham has known, 50 years of just blessing after blessing after blessing. And now God asks Abraham, do you love me just because of the blessings I provide for you? Or do you love me for me? Abraham, I want you to give me your only son. The son whom you've loved, the son whom you've waited for, longed for, so that I can see your heart toward me. So verse 2, Abraham, it says, here God says to Abraham, take now your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. Now just a few things to note about verse 2. First of all, God calls Isaac your only son, Isaac. But we know that Abraham had another son, Ishmael. If you remember, Ishmael was a work of Abraham's flesh. He was a work of Abraham's flesh. We saw in an earlier chapter that God loved Ishmael. God had a plan for Ishmael. God was going to bless Ishmael. But here, God does not recognize Ishmael as a son. He only recognizes Isaac, the son of promise, which shows us that God does not remember the works of our flesh. He doesn't remember the works of our flesh. Through Jesus Christ, the works of our flesh are forgiven and they are forgotten by God. And that is good news for us, right? Because we've got a lot of works of our flesh. Next to verse 2, you can write the words, hip, hip, hooray. He doesn't remember the works of our flesh. He doesn't recognize them. The second thing we can note about this verse, verse 2, is this is the first mention of the word love in the Bible. And it's speaking of the love of a father for his son that he is about to sacrifice. The third thing we can note here is God tells Abraham to go to the land of Moriah and offer his only son on one of the mountains there. Moriah is in Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles chapter 3 verse 1 tells us that Solomon built the temple on Mount Moriah. And near to Mount Moriah, right next to Mount Moriah, is Mount Calvary, Golgotha, where God offered His only Son, whom He loved, Jesus Christ, as a sacrifice for the sins of the world. Near to the same place that Abraham offers Isaac. Abraham offering Isaac at Moriah is a picture of God the Father offering His Son, Jesus Christ, on the cross. In Galatians chapter 3, verse 8, the Apostle Paul says the gospel was preached to Abraham. Jesus said, Abraham rejoiced to see my day. Well, when was the gospel preached to Abraham? When did Abraham see the day of Jesus Christ? At Moriah. At Moriah, when he offered his only son, Isaac, whom he loved. Abraham saw the gospel of Jesus Christ on this day. Verse 3, it says, "So Abraham rose early in the morning and saddled his donkey and took 2 of his young men, his servants, with him, and Isaac his son, and he split the wood for the burnt offering. And he arose and he went to the place of which God had told him." I want you to note here Abraham's obedience. He arose early the next morning and he headed out. He didn't delay. He didn't hesitate. Even though I'm sure this was very emotional for Abraham, I'm sure it was difficult for him to obey God, but he obeyed God immediately. When God tells us to do something, we should obey Him immediately and without delay, even if it's difficult for us to do. So then on the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place afar off. So it's a 3-day journey from Beersheba up to Moriah in Jerusalem. And the 3rd day here, of course, that reminds us of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Abraham doesn't fully understand what's happening here, but his son is going to live on this day. It will be, Hebrews tells us, it's as if his son is resurrected. And it's on the 3rd day that he lives. And Abraham said to his young men, and watch what he says here in verse 5. He says to his 2 servants, "Stay here with the donkey. The lad and I will go yonder." Sounds like Uncle Jed from the Beverly Hillbillies. "The lad and I will go yonder and worship, and we will come back to you." He says, the lad and I are going to worship. This was an act of worship. Remember, like we saw with Job and like we saw with David? Abraham worships God in this test. And it's an act of worship not just for Abraham, but it's an act of worship for both Abraham and Isaac. The lad and I are going to worship. You know, we talk about the faith of Abraham. We shouldn't forget the faith of Isaac. Isaac was infected with his father's faith in God. They do this together. They go together. Isaac was a willing participant in this with his father. You know, Isaac was about 30 years old at this point. I know in the children's Bible storybooks, Isaac is always portrayed as a little boy. I know there's songs on the radio that makes Isaac sound like this little boy who doesn't know what's really happening, but that's not true. I don't mean to burst your bubble with that.